And we are live with Eric Kalenze, educator, author, Twin Cities music aficionado, I just found out. Good morning, Eric. Thank you for coming on.
Howdy, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So I'm really happy to have you on for a lot of different reasons, but the main one is I am fascinated now with the idea of what should we be talking about if we're going to replace all the stuff we should not be talking about anymore in education.
Yeah, yeah.
And it seems like you're one of the guys that has had a critique for a long time about the school reform debate and the way that we missed the point. We're off track. And what I like about what you have to say is it gets me out of the politics of education and gets me more into the brass tacks of pedagogical interventions of how we do better. And that's all I really care about now. I had author David Didow earlier, and I was telling him I'm looking for the achievement gospel. Like, what's the good news in achievement? I know the bad news already, so I want to know like where the hope is. But looking at your stuff, you have something in your blog recently that I thought I understood, that you were talking about an evidence-free zone. And you had a 3-part series in talking about this. And in the last part, you were more saying you're just making peace with the evidence-free zone, and there's some silver lining to it. But I thought I understood what it meant. Help me understand what you mean when you say evidence-free zone in education.
Well, and I mean, as you know, from previous conversation, previous work, it's like I'm kind of the evidence uber alles person.
Right.
That's really what I would hope we would make more of our decisions according to in education. Evidence of how people learn, evidence of what's worked previously, so on and so forth. And I'm just basically saying in the pandemic context, we have entered an utterly evidence-free zone, as in we have no precedent, there's no proof anywhere, and there's certainly no playbook about how to do it well. And I think one of the things that I've definitely observed in the enterprise, and again, this is informed by Twitter and just connections around the world, really through research ed and things like that, noticing a lot of school staffs when the edict came down to like, this is what y'all got to organize and make real in a week because we're going to be shutting the doors. I just started watching people grab this and that and the other thing, and we're going to do this and that and the other thing. And I'm kind of like, well, but there we go again. We're kind of pulling a bunch of stuff that sounds intuitively right, perhaps, or things we think will make a big difference for kids. But I'm like, are we really pausing to gather evidence in this evidence-free zone about what families can handle, what families want to handle, what kids can sustain when they are transformed into just a purely distance learner? I mean, distance learning is, I think the term is instructive in itself. It's the same with personalized learning, in that it's all about the learner. And I think the only evidence we really have about personalized learning or distance learning is that it really only works when there's it really only generates effective learning when there's a great deal of engagement on the part of the learner. Okay, so people who are very motivated to get that degree at, an online university, for example, finish, but many don't. And I think like when we start to see that as the evidence and go, the evidence we have is that this doesn't work real well. Why don't we like wait around in the evidence-free zone and actually try to collect as much local evidence as we can, and then make our plans. I guess you probably heard the analogy that people use pretty often when it comes to like rolling out a new product, like as an app developer. App developers often push out a version 1.0. They don't wait till the thing is fully done. That's kind of the approach my school is adopting, is saying, we don't know what's going to work. We are going to have to see first, okay, and then commit to being formative, as to borrow from like educational argot. They like to say, we're going to have to say, did this work? Was that too much, families? Okay, now after a week of that, how can we make this more manageable? How can we keep the rigor where we want it, but also factor in that y'all are up against some really tough stuff right now. You might be losing jobs, you might be okay. And so in kind of trying to manage that, that's how we're dealing with the evidence-free zone, is by committing to generate some evidence in the absence of none.
You know, I'm matching up two things about your body of work that that I don't know if they match up. So in one way, you I think support bottom up solutions in schools, not everything coming down from the district brass and being centrally managed, and then, you know, the automation of the principal who then makes little robots out of the teachers. It feels like you are against that. On the one hand, you'd like to flip that model and say, you know, the bottom up. But on the other hand, what you just mentioned about a whole bunch of school districts grasping for whatever they can pull off the shelf in times like this. And, you know, I've seen more than one school district where the teachers in the first week or so are searching the internet for things, right? You know, and just grabbing whatever, you know, they can. Those two things are hard to reconcile for me. Like putting more power into the hands of folks to do whatever they want bottoms up to make things better, versus a lot of people from the bottom up, when they get that opportunity, just grasp for straws. Like, you know, they pull whatever looks good from Pinterest into their classroom. Like those two things are hard to reconcile for me. Help me reconcile those.
Yeah, and I guess you're really striking at like what my whole commitment to making a more evidence like informed and supported profession is all about. Is grasping at straws, if you are given full control to do your own thing, is only as good as the amount of information and education you have to make the right decisions. And so there's kind of this dual thing going on. You know, at the one hand, I would, and I wouldn't be so against. I wouldn't be so against top-down administration of improvement if it were better informed itself.
If they were good at it, you mean if they were actually good at it?
Right. I'll, you know, one of our favorite school districts in Common. I'm just going to say they have some really terrible ideas that are required across the system for all kids, that they are committed to being the best things. Now, if they left that in full control of the schools, I can't guarantee at this point in time that they would choose the right things. And so the urgency becomes, you know, to really say, how do we inform the ground level the best we can? Okay. And then how do you also make the ground level into the best possible evidence-based decision makers?
There seems to be a tension though, Eric. There's a tension between, like, you know, the whole Spider-Man thing with great power comes great responsibility, right? Like the idea of trusting teachers or letting people have autonomy or do their own thing. There's a tension between that and them being competent enough to deserve that, right? And you have entire systems where it's not clear that that's the case, right? Like it's, you know, so the school district that you and I have in common, I think, is not set up at any level to put its pants on every morning, right? Like, and that's from the board down to the teacher level. And it makes it really hard as a citizen to know where you place your trust in something getting better.
Right.
You know, and it sounds like you believe that with good information, good research, well-trained and well prepared people, like in schools and staff, that's the recipe for being able to iterate success. But how do you get to that part where you have that, all those good things working for you?
Right. Well, and it's a process. It's not something we're going to be able to flick the switch on.
Oh, come on, man! Not tomorrow.
I'm so sorry.
I thought you would have this figured out right now.
I do know from my time there that I was actually part of a force that I thought was there. It was the Office of School Improvement. Okay, and there was a team of folks that was tasked with helping you execute your school improvement. Now, I won't say we, you know, unlocked the box, you know, by any means, but it was in an office that really only existed for about 3 years before someone decided no, that's got to go.
Always, every 3 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure if you're familiar with our states. They have a thing called the Regional Centers for Excellence.
Yes. Yeah.
MDE, and they effectively have the same purpose. Okay, so what they now, and I think they modeled it actually on NPS's uh, Office of School Improvement. Okay, so it's like a team of folks spread out with a portfolio of schools, really trying to assist them in making the best improvement decisions and having effective improvement processes. And then once you determine what the needs are at the site, you provide the professional development, and it's this snowball, right? I think they've found it very hard because I think it's very hard to maintain touch with your portfolio of schools when they cover a 7,000 square mile area. At the same time, when you have those like divisions of school improvement kind of built into the mix and saying, we're going to help you make the plans. Okay, we're going to really determine what the site level needs are in terms of more learning. Like for instance, I can think of the schools that I was working with. We were pretty regularly able to say, we do have to work out this problem of kids reading on grade level by third grade. Okay, the problem became just what you mentioned is that when we started to throw possible solutions on the table, people would make really evidence weak choices of saying things like, well, the thing we really need to do, I guess, is have more artists and residents coming in to engage the kids for school. And I'm like, well,
I think that will fix everything. I don't know what's wrong with you, Eric. I think that's, we need more clowns in schools.
But then there's baby steps being made as well, with, thanks to the work of someone like Emily Hanford. Sorry, I know people talk like there's a new backlash against that idea. But really,
we'll stick with that for a second. Just stick with that for a second, because Emily is a national journalist who took it on to look at the reading wars, took it on herself as a subject matter to unearth the fact that we teach reading the wrong way in the United States and have for a long time, and that there's actual science about how you do it, and we're ignoring the science. We're not preparing teachers to teach in the way that aligns with science on reading. And not long after, she started celebrating this idea and people started latching onto it. A think tank in Colorado that's known for putting out education research that's funded by teachers and teachers unions and teachers associations came out to debunk what she's unearthed and said there is no science of reading, right? There really isn't. Okay, so you're a citizen, not you personally, but me. I'm an average citizen. I read newspapers. I try to be reasonably intelligent about what I'm reading. And now I have seen scientists and teachers go to war with each other over something that felt like it was settled, kind of, right? Now what happens? How do I call that one as a civilian to these debates? How do I not do the reflexive thing is to say, you're all full of it? None of you got any ideas. How do you call that? How do you call that one actually when you see something like that?
And this is, I know I'm inviting hot water, but hey, why not? The thing I would love to impress upon the citizens who are keeping up with it and really attempting to understand it is I would love to let them know that when it comes to scientists in the educational realm, so like what we think of ed school academics, or what I think of in response to a really thoughtful prompt I thought you put out a few weeks ago on Twitter about what would the education establishment say? My version of the education establishment are the educational academics. Okay, the experts in education.
That's the folks in higher ed.
Yes.
Like professors, researchers, all those folks. Okay.
Yeah. The single gateway through which every single educator must pass. And so it's a very influential body. And so what they say about what is ideal, I guess we're supposed to trust it. Okay. I trusted it, until I got about 3-4 years of my teaching career. And I went, this is just not adding up. Like the promise was promising, when I learned it and I attempted to apply it. And then my kids, they just weren't learning as much as I could. And I went elsewhere. Okay. Only to find that underneath that, there is all this, cognitive science. okay, that really says, no, I hate to tell you, but people don't learn according to the ideals that y'all throw
Well,
out
I
there.
want to say this too. I just want to put this on the table. And you went to a good college, right? So you went to like a good college that's notable. There's a lot of teacher prep programs that are in fly by night colleges that aren't even up to the standard of the college by far that you went to. So now you have a whole nation of teachers going through a filter before they get to schools that isn't the right one, right? Isn't preparing them to understand. I'm still like sticking though on this idea about how does research meet up with the teacher, right? Like, teacher doesn't have time to be, well, God forbid what I was about to say, doesn't have time to be reading the research. That flies against everything you believe in, right?
No. I mean, I think that's, and again, the work with Research Ed, with which you're familiar, and thank you very much for coming and doing a panel for us back in October. But the work that Research Ed does, it like exists to provide a bridge between there, because there are just not enough. Okay, and I think in some ways we're actually hurt in the U.S. by our name. In that, I think the implication is y'all should get reading like research studies, and I got to say, I don't know that was ever what we were attempting to say. It's not to turn people into hobby researchers. It is though to get enough people, at least I don't know, in a crude way, even familiar with what the research actually says, and start that feeding folks' practice. Okay, so and back to Emily for a second. That's why her I don't know, her body of work over the past 18 months or so is so valuable to folks like me. Like we were kind of people in my set were jumping up and down for years for someone of that sort of magnitude. So like an NPR like level magnitude or American Public Media, like of their magnitude to bring this to the fore. Okay? And I think when it hit a lot of teachers, they went, I had no idea. I mean, I think you can actually go back and Education Week has done a lot of work with this, kind of following in behind Emily, saying, hey, teachers, what do you think of not knowing that? They're like, and the folks they tend to interview say, I feel so cheated. Now, I won't pretend to think that they all went home and became voracious readers of the research. Okay, but just that sheer realization is point one. It got them back to school questioning the stuff that their curriculum and instruction experts at the district have been telling them to do, and giving them the resources to do when they're like, I don't think this meets my kids. I mean, like, to me, to hit thousands of teachers with that idea for the first time, some are going to become very passionate researchers. I mean, I've lots of people in my circle who have dug far into that now that the light has come on, and still others who are just like, no, I'm just a questioner. For now, I'm a questioner. And to me, I think like rather than think we bridge the gap by turning everybody into hobby researchers and very dedicated researchers. No. There's lots of great in between sources that you can read and get way up on stuff without having to be deep into it. I think, and we've talked about him before, but someone like Dan Willingham writes highly accessible work on just this, gap between research and practice. I don't think many people know the work of Dan Willingham, but a lot of his they're not research studies that he's publishing in his book necessarily. It's a curation of a lot of research studies, and if you wish, you can jump into the references and check out the papers yourself. And but I don't know that you even have to. So to me, it's about bridge building, and that's what Research Ed exists to do, I guess, and that's why I'm so committed to it. So,
well, here's one of my big frustrations. My big frustration is, I focus a lot on the marginalized students. I focus a lot on students that historically have been oppressed and have been behind. That I have a deep distrust for the system, period, and the people in it and the people that are earning from it. And what I don't see is enough curiosity about the bad practice when it becomes so convenient to say poverty and parents and, all of the external factors, out of school factors. Those are the things that we need to focus on. And this is where I have a problem with education and educators and their unions and their districts and their brass, is that if they focused intently on fixing the things that they have control over, I would be with them. But it seems like they are so enamored with the easy out, which is to talk endlessly about how damaged the kids are, how bad they are, how much of a hug they need. We need to get them I had to give them 8, granola bars from my desk last week, and it's kind of like, that's great, but do you know how to teach reading? Well, no, but I had to give out granola bars last week because they were all so hungry. You know what they're hungry for? They're hungry for something that might help them earn a living in the future. And to have people who are not curious enough, when they find out something like, we were not prepared to teach reading, and it's a national problem, the entire next day and every day afterwards should be a conversation about fixing that before we even talk about the poverty of kids. Does that frustrate you at all, that we have so many easy answers to get out of talking about the real nuts and bolts of teaching and learning?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I love that you bring it up, because I would offer back that sometimes it gets in my first book, in the introduction somewhere, I talk about a lot of reform efforts like that attempted to make things right. I said, until they're focusing on practice, it's a bit like beating a blind horse.
That's a terrible metaphor.
If you beat a lazy horse to get it moving.
If anybody's watching from PETA, I am 100% plant-based diet, but go ahead.
I'm so sorry. But along with the phrase, beating a lazy horse to get it moving. Right?
Yeah.
What I would offer is that the educational horse is not lazy; it's blind, and it doesn't know the right things to do because it's never really been trained in them. Okay, and so some ways to beat it, okay, or to flog it to get it moving is probably not as productive as teaching it or helping it see, so it can go the right way. And I think exactly what you're describing is like an expression of that blindness, when you don't necessarily know what will help, and you're doing just what the so-called experts have told you to do, sometimes to the letter, and it's still not helping. I think it becomes easy to default to the pure, emotional or sentimental parts of the job. Like, I'm here for the kids, I love them first, and then I think it said, unfortunately, I think it sets up this duality between people who are committed to knowing how people learn and different people learn, and what they need. Again, I won't go. I'll leave that alone for a second. But I think it sets up this duality between people who care about those things. They care about, say, cognitive science, almost get lumped into a basket of, well, you just don't care about kids. You don't care about loving them. I'm like, I love them very much.
Well, listen, there's nothing that proves a love to a child, to me, with you helping them learn the foundational knowledge things, help them acquire the foundational knowledge they need to succeed in the world. That I can't think of a better way of loving somebody, and proving that you love somebody, is to make sure they leave your class, ready to go to the next grade. I feel like, listening to you, though, you do have a lot of faith and belief in teachers to do the right thing if they have the right stimuli, the right motivation to make it happen.
Not all,
and probably not enough, in that the conversation that you want to have, I find many teachers don't even want to start.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is because they want you to understand ahead of time, it's not me, it's the kids.
Yeah.
Right. So when you don't believe that you have anything to improve on or to fix, I've had a teachers union president and a teachers union person that say straight up to me, if you want better schools, give me better kids. Straight to my face. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm on the board of a school district, and I have the union person who's leading teachers to believe that we're all trying to ruin them. Tell me straight up, you want better schools, give me better students. I don't know how to fix that.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know what you do in that case,
Well, and one thing it's one of the reasons I find, and again, it's one of the reasons I find like the charter sector really, really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think when you have some freedom to kind of hire for the type of dispositions you want, and conditions for loosen the conditions for parting with those who don't fit those visions. I think we are onto something really exciting there. I am totally committed to the idea of like the traditional public school as well. I absolutely think they can improve. I've seen it happen. Again, that's what my whole second book is about.
Talk about an evidence-free zone. Say more, Eric. Tell me more. Tell me more about what have you seen that makes you hopeful in traditional districts that they can improve? What's the hopeful signs?
The hopeful signs is that I think you really can have effective, like bottom-up improvement processes working. Okay, it does take some time. It does take some strategy. It does take being willing to go into your data and let it tell you what you need to instruct yourself on better. And I think so many times when we look at data, we think, well, what are we going to do? Like sometimes you look at data and say, we don't know enough about that. I can think of like again, if I just think of my portfolio of schools at the school district we know so well, and the work we did through the continual improvement processes we were building, that again never got to come to full fruition because we didn't exist long enough. It was things like, okay, we don't understand why kids aren't reading on grade level by third grade. And I'll just keep using that one example because it came up in so many schools. Okay, that was a perfect opportunity for us to say, well, hey, everybody, I happen to have all this science over here that we don't look at.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that really got people's attention. Okay. They said, you got to be kidding me. Okay. And so we started to dig into that a little bit, but then you meet the obstacles of the district who says, no, this is our literacy approach and you must get through this obstacle. So then your second job, and this was a big part of my job, was fighting teaching and learning. Like fighting the teaching and learning department. So this plucky little school over here that really knows what the problem is now can do what they got to do. Okay, but if we had systems, for instance, this is the part that gives me hope. If you build into your continuous improvement processes a learn element, okay, so like I think it's one that's sadly missing. I've written about that before. But in continuous improvement, you built in a realization and the humility, that we have to train ourselves better on certain things. Okay, so when you pull off the shelf that again we need more artists in residence, or how we're going to get at better literacy scores is to improve our SEL game. When you start doing that and pointing out, and you have someone like I don't know, like my office once upon a time, that can kind of guide you through that. Like, are you sure about that? Like I think if you commit to learning and let that infuse your improvement processes, I do think they can get better. And again, like I say, and I bring up and I know you're skeptical, and I don't blame you.
Let's hear this, because I have lots of skepticism. So on which part?
I know. Well, I'm just saying, like the book, the second book that I just wrote, that was, the basis for all this hope comes out of a very real experience I had. And it was a big old school in the metro where I was a teacher. Had a very visionary principal. We hadn't even thought of the term continuous school improvement yet, but he said we have to figure out some way where we get better in the long term. Okay, so this is before the Carnegies of the world started, coming along with, plan, do, study, act cycles and all the rest, but he got us improving in these ways and actually looking at our school-based information. And this is early in the days of big educational data too. So none of these processes were very mature at the point. But we made the best with what we had. We made clear, actionable improvement actions that everybody could carry out. And the challenge is, just as you mentioned, it was getting a massive school, not a massive school. YZ is a massive school. Obviously, is not a massive school, but big. You got 120 staffers. Certainly, not all of them are going to be on board. But then that you made that a matter of school culture. Okay, so can we all link arms on this action all year long? Okay, and if you get the 20% who say I'm never ever coming with you, okay, then that becomes an administrative matter. Okay, but generally
that's a huge matter, though. It's not easy to take care of.
Correct.
It's almost an impossible matter. I mean, I had a principal back in the day tell me that if you have one teacher that requires removal, it could be 15% of your time.
Absolutely.
So now have three. Now have three teachers in your building that you need to be a full-time documentarian on and need to bird dog their performance. Now you're no longer a principal. Now you are a full-time admin, person.
Yep. And we had, and I learned this again from that principal who means so very much to me. I still consider him a mentor. He had a very ingenious way of dealing with that within the culture itself, and to kind of keep the culture humming. And that was, he would go to those people, and again, we're talking 20%. Okay? 20%
That's a lot too, by the way.
Oh yeah, and
that's a huge number.
Yeah, and like when you're talking 120 staff.
Wow.
And of the 20, I think 10 can be persuaded. Okay? And like 10 are never going to come with you. And he basically had a great line for them. He would kind of take them aside and say, I understand you're in the 10% that is never going to come with me or with what the school is up to, and that we're getting so much steam on. You are free to disagree with me. I'm not going to tell you what to do, and I can't remove you easily without it taking up 20, 15% of my entire day for 6 months. But the condition is you don't have to disagree, but you cannot sabotage. As in,
wow.
As in, you and maybe you'll come along, but the thing I cannot hear of you doing is pissing in the water. Like you can't, you cannot be talking about this in the parking lot. You cannot be talking about this in the staff lounge. Like the things you disagree with they will become a highly administrative priority. If I hear that, you're actively working.
You can't be toxic.
That's right.
Really, you just can't be toxic. You and I have had this conversation offline, and I'm not going to name names. This should be a broadcast where I name names, but whatever. I'm not going to name names. But, I think that there's such an inclination to celebrate the emotional and emotive leaders who strike out more on poverty porn than practice, right? So in Minneapolis, we have this example of a very celebrated school that is the worst performing in the entire district, probably in the state of Minnesota in some ways. It's a school that we shouldn't have left open years ago. We closed better performing schools to leave this one open specifically so that we could beef it up and make it the wonder school. We put a brand new principal who had no experience being a principal in there, who came in as a reformer and was going to reform everything, got a year in, 2 years in, 3 years in, and figured out, had no idea how to improve performance. So went the other route, went the union route, became the talking head of the, I just love teachers. We just need to cry about things. We just need to look at how poor our students are. And oh my God. And, the news media and an author embedded in the district, all these white folks with platforms came and studied it to death and lifted it up as like the white emotional, awakening. You love them simply by not caring anymore if they read or not. If we just hug them every day, right? And that's Minneapolis in a nutshell to me. It's the most frustrating thing in a nutshell to me because the it of this school is whether or not kids are learning. The it is not a hug. So if you're not concentrating on the it, like putting the first thing first, it's easy to go through generation after generation after generation of loved kids that you've loved so much who are in jail, right? Can't buy a house, right? Can't have the same life, can't teach in your school. Actually won't ever become a teacher, because to become a teacher, you have to get into college and finish and then go through some other stuff and then get a job, right? And you can't do that if you're in a school that is putting you into poverty pornography for the public to not care about academics anymore. It's my long-winded way of saying, I don't know about improvement. I have a lot to be cynical about when it comes to whether or not a district like the one that I spent so much time having hope in. I watched them go through multiple plans, right? And so now I am 10 years out from having been on the board, right? When I came on the board, I had people who had been watching the district since the 70s grab me and say, Chris, there's always going to be a new plan. There's going to be something. You're going to fall into the trap of really believing in stuff. But I've been watching the district since the 70s. Just call me whenever there's a new plan, and I'll tell you which plan it used to be in the past, right? So everything from continuous improvement to fundamentals to comprehensive learning to new math and old math and fuzzy math to the reading wars, the science wars, to textbook adoptions that ended poorly, to everybody just do what they want, free and open schools. You know, the Southeast Alternatives was an entire federally funded zone of Minneapolis public schools that was given the freedom to just do whatever they wanted.
Yep.
Right? Like just whatever kind of school you want to have. So we've went from NCLB, you know, like bean counting schools and plans to just do whatever you want, hippie love, you know, schools and whatnot, and everything in between. And it's left me very cynical about whether or not it's even the goal of this thing to ever. So that's a long-winded cynicism play right there that I just gave you.
I got you.
But where am I wrong? Where are the lies in this? Because that's all cynicism, and I want hope. You know, I want to believe that things can happen. So where's the lie in what I said?
Shoot, well, zero lies and zero
no lies detected.
Zero lies, zero inaccuracies. That's all dead on. I would still maintain that of all the plans I've seen trotted in and out of there, and shoot, they are a test case. I mean, this is so many districts USA.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like it's this sort of ineptitude flatly is so common. And I've actually consulted in districts where I've seen it worse.
So you're saying this isn't like a local problem. This is like, this is something that happens elsewhere. Sure.
Yeah. And I often say that like this whole education game, it's kind of like plumbing. Like it's like at the end of the day, it's pipes, water, and gravity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it might take some time to get behind the wall, but when you really think about it, it's always the same problems.
Mm-hmm.
Just maybe configured differently. It's always, you know, teachers groups like blocking certain actions, uninformed folks at the district level who are, you know, pulling all of the strings, the dysfunctional board that's trying to,
oh God,
you know,
So you just hit all of them.
You know, I mean, and I wish I could say, we just happen to have a really bad one here, but we have a bad one just across the river too, you know, with, you know, very similar problems, you know.
And it always seemed when you say across the river, people watching or listening, you know, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, there's Minneapolis and St. Paul. St. Paul often, because I was a family in St. Paul and had a kid in St. Paul public schools, was always assumed to be the better of the two, like fewer outright overt dysfunctional problems. Like it was seen, and had a great superintendent for a long period of time and some great internal staff that did some things that all got unwound when they left. But even that one has seen issues since. Let me throw a couple of things at you and just see what you think about them in terms of proposed interventions that we have seen. What do you think about teacher-led schools? Taking the principal out, you have teacher-led school.
Everything depends. And I'm sorry, I can't give the like.
So it depends. It depends on
Yeah,
what do you think it depends on?
uh, the efficacy of those teachers. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like the there is a whole teacher-led school movement in
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, I've interacted with some of those schools again in consulting roles or whatnot, and so many times, sorry, the folks who are running them had these kind of hippie do what you want sorts of things. Like the key will be we'll have a school that's all like outdoor and canoeing and things
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
that.
We've had a lot of that in Minnesota.
I know, and
Yeah, the wild rice schools. Yeah,
that's right.
yeah,
We're
yeah.
gonna like build it all on this foundation, and then uh, um, and then their academic scores suffer. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, duh. And people say, well, you know, uh, what are you doing to improve that? And they just don't know.
Yeah,
They don't
they
know.
don't. They
They're
they
like
want
more
happy
canoeing,
kids though. The kids are
right?
happy though.
Right,
Yeah,
more canoeing. I mean,
yeah.
there's a huge difference between placating kids
Mm-hmm.
and helping kids grow.
So there's one. So what do you think about the focus on student-centered learning and personalized learning? I think you have a countercultural idea about these
Yeah.
things.
Again, depends on the student.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on personalized learning. I think, and I mean, this is one of the things I hope folks are keeping a finger on as we look at in the current like what I call disastance learning. It's disaster learning.
Wow. Yeah.
It's disaster in
Yeah. Yeah.
context and it's distance, so disastance.
Yeah. Wow.
In the current setting, though, I got to say, uh, if parents were ever wondering if their kids were set up to do well in a personalized context or an fully online context, they should be watching their kids right now because
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think I think what the tendency has been is the parents see a disaffected student in a school, uh, in the traditional school, and they say, "Well, let's go online then." Okay, they pull their kid out, they enroll them in a online high school or whatever. You know, 3 quarters go by and the student hasn't turned in any work. It turned out the same like low motivation that they had in
Mm-hmm.
school was just like on fire when it was at home and they were left to their own devices. And they shunt their kids back into the schools as fast as they can. I think right now, you should really be watching. Everyone, I would hope, is kind of watching their kids for like how well they can do this. I'm seeing some
Mm-hmm.
kids do really well. I'm sorry.
Oh, my kids are like, I think they're the happiest I've seen them.
Yeah, I mean, and
Pretty
that's
ironic, and I'm happy as a parent because, to be very honest with you, when you mix kids into big numbers of kids that have all things going on, sometimes you're not paying attention to the stuff your kids are bringing home that isn't really innate to them. It's what they're sucking up while they're in that. So when you have them home like this, you start to noticing like, wait a second, my kid is less of a jackass than I thought, right? Like, wow, maybe the school thing isn't like, maybe the school thing wasn't exactly the thing we should be doing. I haven't been able to put my thumb on how you feel about standardized testing. What do you think about it?
I think we got to have it. I think we got to improve it. Um,
Do you think it narrows curriculum? That's the big rip on it. It narrows the curriculum.
yeah, and that's part of what we have to improve. I take some heat sometimes for in my first book. I was actually a huge defender of the Common Core literacy standards, which were
Mm-hmm.
just kind of rolling out at the time.
As you should be, but keep going.
Yeah, yeah. I defended them,
Yeah.
but I'm highly critical of their design.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just from a like creating a more research informed profession, because here's what they did. Uh, do you know Appendix B by any chance, or
Mm-hmm.
Appendix A?
No.
Okay, yeah, exactly. These are two documents that basically explain. Appendix A effectively explains the rationale for why we're changing everything,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and Appendix B is a full set, sometimes the full texts of like like cannot ride the ride until this tall.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so like by grade,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as in, and then they put the standards all over in a separate document, and that's the thing that folks designed tests according to, people designed their PD according to, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And I had a school I was working with, Syracuse, New York, that because I regularly bring out this sort of stuff in my improvement work with folks, and they had zero idea. And there was a principal who looked at the level of rigor that was going to be like demanded on the tests. Okay, on test day, and stick with me, this gets convoluted. But the skills articulated in the standards, okay, say this is what children should be able to do at this age, this age, this age, and so forth. But then in the appendix, you have models of they should be able to do those things with texts of this level of difficulty, okay, and complexity. There's a big reason for that explained in Appendix A. Okay. And so I had this principal when all the parts came together, and he said, so my teachers were right all along when they said their kids could do the skills they were teaching according to the standards. And I said, yep. He goes, but all along they were teaching them to ride a trike, and on test day they were handed a bike. And saying, riding these two, and he nailed it, and I've stolen it ever since. I'm like, yep, your teachers trained expert trike riders. And then
so my question in a situation like that, though, would be, okay, so Common Core rolls out for a short period of time and isn't perfect. And everybody takes the opportunity to point out where it's not perfect, which I understand. I like that. But previous to Common Core, you had places like Kentucky and other states that had all kinds of weird stuff that nobody ever critiqued at all. Yep. So this gets me into the thing that I always talk about, like you're throwing rocks at the ambulance. You're not throwing rocks at the thing that caused the accident in the first place, right? Yeah. So with reform, there are people now who critique school reform and everything about it more than they critique what existed before it, like what it was trying to reform. Yep. And Common Core is another great example for me in that if anyone ever thought that there was going to be a common set of standards that would roll out and within 5 years be perfect, especially with trying to correct for all what the different governors had going on in their different states. I think that just works to the hands of people that didn't want any change in the first place. They didn't want national standards or common standards. And that's both on the left and the right. There are people at far right wing who believe that's government intrusion. There's people on the far left who believe that schools should never be measured, right? Like in a way that's, consistent or common. So we started that, though, Common Core, about talking about standardized testing. How did you feel also about No Child Left Behind? We're in a period now where, everybody's looking retrospective about it, like it's over, like in some ways. And I think there's a consensus amongst a lot of people, left and right, conservatives and liberals, that it was government overreach. It didn't do much. And there's not much, I think, looking at the data or the evidence of what it did, but there's I think, a folklore about it. How did you feel about NCLB? And when you look back at it, what do you think it did?
Well, I certainly thought it set, flatly unreasonable targets. I mean, but that's probably
100% proficiency, Eric. That is attainable.
I mean, but, and so like that kind of stuff. I think those are my biggest gripes. I think, and in this, anytime you start coming around and calling yourself I'm the anti-top down guy, I think people assume that you must hate standardized tests. Like, no, like I'm very much the other way. And NCA and actually being accountable to them as a career education professional, I think accountability is one of the must-haves for us being a more, respected profession. And so anybody who resists that, I kind of resist them back. Like if you say we shouldn't have, not you say, but if anybody who says, we should never have anything like No Child Left Behind, setting targets, holding folks accountable, and what have you. I just kind of think they're nonsense. The parts I wasn't crazy about were, again, some of the targets, obviously, were crazy balls. But some of the other stuff, like, here's what we're going to do in the event of schools that are chronically failing.
You didn't like the remedies.
No, because they,
yeah.
And I watched a school refresh.
Yeah.
We must be straight with each other. I mean, what was the thinking behind that? And two, and again, are the district we have in common and so love. If you have two schools that are ordered to undergo a refresh according to the statutes of NCLB, you essentially got schools that traded staffs.
Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
So the
But
idea
that wasn't really a problem of NCLB, right?
well, but those were that was more the SIG. Okay, so
Yeah.
here's
And what I learned, on as being on the board was, remember those 4 stages of death in NCLB?
yeah,
Like, stage 1, you just feel kind of bad for a couple of days, and stage 2, we start replacing staff and whatever, and then there's this thing called safe harbor where you could be,
yeah.
taken out of the process. What I learned was all that was nonsense. You could do really whatever you wanted. You
And that's
really
right.
could. There was a way to like game the system to where a school would never face a real consequence,
That's
if we're
exactly
being
right.
real, right? So
That's
it was really
exactly
just a
right.
game, a
Yeah,
shell game. And part of it, I think, that people don't talk about it is how conditions at the local level impact the national law or mandate. For instance, like collective bargaining agreements, right? You want to fix a school. I mean, we had schools that we couldn't get the teachers union or the teachers to sign on to for 2 years. We had schools that had such chronic problems with keeping staff that we said any teacher who comes here is going to sign on to the educational philosophy of this school, and they're going to be selected by the principal to be here. And we need them to give at least a 2-year commitment to staying here. And we had a union official say directly to us, it is the rite of passage for a teacher as they get more years under their belt to shop for better schools.
yeah.
So no, we can't give you an assurance that that's not something NCLB can fix, right?
That's right.
Right.
That
You
is
can't
right.
fix stupid.
That's right. And good luck attempting to make that happen when there's kind of like the entrenched way of doing things. It's been there for 50
Mm-hmm.
years.
Mm-hmm.
Just some of those organizing groups. And again, which is not to say. Uh, Again, it depends sort of thing. If teacher organizing groups were committed to kind of different things than they tend to be, uh, I sure wouldn't lump them together. So
Here's what I would love for, I give unions and teachers unions a hard time. Here's what I would love. I would love if 90% of their advocacy was the stuff that Research Ed, the organization that you work with, the organization that brings together people with practice, brings together research and teachers, brings them into one place so that they can share space and share time and energy around what can we do. If that was 90% of the advocacy of unions with their power and their money, and they were going up to the state capitol with that as part of their agenda, and they were having every interview or public interaction be about, no, these are the things that matter. How we teach, what goes on in the classrooms. We are professionals. We want to talk about that. If that were their basis, I'd be their biggest fan. I'd be
yeah,
wearing a union t-shirt right now.
and
Like
such.
right now, the first group that does that, as a matter of fact, they're going to give me a t-shirt. I'm going to wear it. Right.
Hey, there is one. They're in Canada though. Um,
Really?
yeah,
Wow.
like check this out.
No.
I got invited to speak in Toronto a couple years ago now, and it was a research ed event, and I was there. Dan Willingham was there. Tom Bennett, Martin Robinson, just a lot of great people,
Mm-hmm.
and it was humbling to be around them. Uh, I guess I didn't realize when I got invited to it just what it was, and it was effectively a union gathering, okay, from the OSSTF, that is the Ontario Secondary Schools Teachers Federation, or whatever the organization's name is. And what they basically did, they have their union president, a guy named Harvey Bischoff, said he was using a research ed event to basically be a union, like for the members. And so the
Mm-hmm.
members were there to discuss labor, work conditions, stuff like that. And instead, they got this menu of all these like researchy education people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their questions were fascinating because they were like, this is really revelatory stuff. I had never heard. I actually watched someone in the audience ask Dan Willingham to go back and explain that thing you said about learning styles. Like she'd never heard that until that point, and my jaw is dropping. And as I was just interacting with people all weekend long, they were telling me, like just how valuable something like this was. But it was the first time they'd ever seen something like that, and certainly brought to them by the union. And Harvey uses this entire conference to basically build up to like one of the final presentations of the weekend was him saying these are the 5 pillars of our OSSTF platform now. And one of them was we want to be more dedicated to learning stuff like this. We want to demand that. We want to demand that we get good PD for a change instead of this, Ferris wheel of fads, like that we constantly have, that we all
what
say
I've always heard, it's called drive-by. I hear teachers say that all the time, drive-by PD.
Exactly. And this is like responding to a regular member gripe, which was our PD sucks. It doesn't make a difference. They tell us to do something different every year. And he was like, but there's a whole other thing out there. And I know we're coming down to time here, and so the point I want to put on it that won't be very encouraging to you was in research ed conferences that I've organized in the States. And I mean, just a few hours south of Toronto, a few of these have been, I used Harvey, to say, as a union leader, as an organizer, and someone who believes this and sees this, will you please help me in to some of these local teachers unions that are in these cities where we work, so like NYC, DC, Philadelphia a couple of times. And we tried and got silence.
Got nowhere. Yeah.
I mean, as in, it was basically like an endorsement of exactly what you're talking about, which is
this is the point that I think needs to be driven home is I can come on board with them if they start focusing on how to teach my kid and get out of all the enemy imaging. And a quick story, Sharif El-Mekki, who is one of my co-hosts on the Eight Black Hands podcast, has a deep focus on bringing more Black males into teaching and improving Black education and just education overall. And him as an educator, it's been his focus. They do an annual event called the Fellowship. And it's like the second time that I went, it was 300 Black males who teach, educators, young, sharp, energetic individuals. And for a day or two, session after session after session was about how to teach. Was about like things like, how do we break ground in math with Black kids? How do we break ground in reading with Black kids? How do we handle behavior? Whatever. It was all stuff about teaching. And at the exact same time that we were doing that, there was another conference that is part of an organization from a nationally known historian who writes books about education and education reform. And their agenda was 100% about how to fight school reform, how to beat the billionaires, how to stop standardized testing, how to get rid of teacher evaluations. Can you see the polar opposites of those two things?
Yeah. And I think I love when that sort of thing gets raised. Like I hope people are realizing what they're fighting for sometimes.
Right.
Because I don't know. I'm glad you raise it. I hope at the time, as you kind of recognize these two things were going on in a similar like, temporal space that you went, funny. Like, did you get reaction when you kind of pointed that out to?
The only reaction really is on one side, it was really about education. And on the other side, it's really about politics. It's really about like, you only say that because you're a reformer or you're a right winger or you're speaking the tune of the billionaires, whatever. It's all non-education related. Listen, here's my final thought on everything that we're talking about right now. I think the real magic space for us all to come together and have common ground across race and ideology and income and even politics is the how of teaching and learning. It's the thing we should all be curious about. Like, what do we know about how kids learn to read, to write, to become better students, all of that stuff? And to me, that's apolitical. It's a religious. It's a everything, right? So it should be a priority for us to actually really concentrate on that. You and I don't agree on everything, but we agree on this so forcefully that we can be brothers in it, right? Like the people in your crew, a lot of them probably don't agree with a good percentage of my politics or religion or background or whatever, but we believe in this stuff so powerfully as the thing in education that it is, I think, should be the movement.
Absolutely.
Should be the movement. Pedagogy should be the movement. Pedagogical interventions versus sociological interventions should be the way to go. And we should start by teaching people what I'm again calling the achievement gospel. We should start with what is the good news? Like what is working versus starting with the bad news? Because we already know the bad news.
Yeah.
We have big gaps. Even the kids that we think are doing really well, that we think are at the top of the stack, are not doing as well as they could be doing. Right. Like that's something we don't usually admit. Right.
That's right.
So our gold standard is even wrong at this point right now. So long-winded way of saying, I really appreciate the work that you do. I want to keep working together and keep thinking this through. I think there's a point of information and activism. I think I coined a term with you privately that I'm never going to use, which is infovism. I said this to some team members and they were not feeling it at all. But like you have to have information and you have to have activism. You can't have activism without good information. And if you have good information, but nobody ever hears it or never becomes part of the system, who cares, right?
Correct.
So infovism. Let's say it broadly.
I was more into it than your team was, apparently.
Good. I'm glad I have like some backup on it.
It worked.
Yeah. Well, Eric, I appreciate it. Tell people how they can, number one, tell them about your book and where they can find it.
Oh,
your most recent one.
The most recent one is called "What the Academy Taught Us." It's about continuous school improvement, and all really based in an actual continual school improvement experience that I had. So, "What the Academy Taught Us," Amazon, all the other places, and then just through my blog, probably if someone just wants a direct mail copy.
And what's the your blog address?
The blog address is Eric Kalenze, so EricKalenze.wordpress.com.
Okay.
And Twitter and all that stuff,
Brother man, we're gonna have to get you like your own domain at some point, right?
I know.
You have such a unique name. You better like capture it now before someone else does.
I'm telling.
Yeah. All right, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. And for everybody that watched and listened and some of the comments, we really appreciate you all. We're here every day. The Citizen Ed broadcast. I am shut in, so I love to have these type of conversations with people in the network who I think have important things to say and to do. So please join us again, 9 o'clock tomorrow, as always. Thanks, you guys.
See you, buddy.